Welcome back. Today's story isn't about a famous general, a massive tank battle, or a decisive air raid. It's about a small green box that fit in one hand, and why German officers who examined it in Sicily were unknowingly holding the reason their war could no longer be won.
In the summer of 1943, during the brutal fighting in Sicily, German troops overran American positions and gathered captured equipment for analysis. Rifles, helmets, field gear, nothing unusual. But among the debris was something that didn't look like a weapon at all. A compact olive drab radio with a telescoping antenna, 5 miniature vacuum tubes, 1 quartz crystal, less than 5 pounds in total weight. German signal specialists disassembled it carefully. They measured it, tested it, logged its performance. Their official assessment described it as extremely effective, lightweight, efficient, ideal for frontline use by forward observers and infantry units. The uncomfortable truth was simple. The German army had nothing comparable. What those officers did not yet understand was that this little radio was not an isolated invention. It was the visible tip of a technological system Germany had completely failed to anticipate. 7,000 miles away, inside a factory on West Augusta Boulevard in Chicago, a Polish refugee engineer named Henryk Magnuski was refining circuit designs for something even more dangerous to Germany's war effort, a backpack radio that used frequency modulation instead of amplitude modulation, a radio that could cut through the deafening electrical chaos of tank engines, artillery blasts, and battlefield noise, a radio that could communicate over 8 miles of open terrain. And American factories were preparing to build them by the tens of thousands. The German experts in Sicily were studying a symptom, not the disease. They were holding proof of a deeper miscalculation that had begun long before the first American soldier ever fired a shot in Europe. Throughout the 1930s, German military intelligence assessed American industrial and technological capacity. The conclusions were strikingly consistent. The United States was seen as a nation of businessmen and consumers, not engineers or warriors. Its factories produced automobiles and refrigerators, not precision military equipment. Its people, German analysts believed, had grown soft during decades of peace and lacked the discipline required for modern industrial war. Even Adolf Hitler shared this contempt. In early 1942, just weeks after Pearl Harbor, he dismissed America as a decaying state riddled with social divisions. In his view, such a country could never sustain a serious war effort. When President Franklin Roosevelt announced that the United States would produce 50,000 aircraft per year, the German High Command openly laughed. In 1939, American military aircraft production had totaled fewer than 3,000 planes. A 20-fold increase seemed impossible. But the Germans were measuring the wrong things. They focused on tanks, armor thickness, gun calibers, and aircraft performance. What they ignored was the invisible infrastructure that allowed modern armies to function: communications. They did not understand that a radio small enough to fit in a soldier's hand could matter more than an entire tank regiment. The story of American radio superiority did not begin on a battlefield. It began in a laboratory. In 1930, a Columbia University professor named Edwin Howard Armstrong filed a patent that would quietly reshape modern warfare. Armstrong was already one of the most important radio inventors in history. During the First World War, he had created the super heterodyne receiver, a circuit design that would become the foundation of nearly every radio built for the next century. But his most consequential invention was frequency modulation, FM. Conventional radios relied on amplitude modulation. Any electrical interference, lightning, engines, machinery, directly distorted the signal. Static was unavoidable. On a battlefield filled with explosions and engines, AM radios became nearly unusable. FM worked differently. Instead of varying signal strength, it varied frequency. Electrical noise affected amplitude, not frequency, which meant interference was effectively filtered out. The difference was not incremental. It was revolutionary. In November 1935, Armstrong demonstrated FM to the Institute of Radio Engineers in New York. He transmitted sounds that conventional radios could not reproduce clearly: pouring water, tearing paper, fabric rustling, a piano playing with stunning clarity. The audience was stunned into silence. For civilian broadcasting, FM meant higher fidelity. For the military, it meant something far more important: communication that worked in chaos. Tank engines generated massive electrical noise. Artillery detonations created electromagnetic interference. Aircraft engines crackled constantly. AM radios forced operators to repeat messages endlessly. Critical information was delayed or lost entirely. FM cut through all of it. If this kind of hidden technological advantage fascinates you, take a moment to subscribe and like the video. Stories like this rarely get told, and the next part explains why Germany made a choice that locked this advantage permanently out of reach. In 1938, the U.S. Army Signal Corps made a decision that Armstrong himself later called one of the most difficult in the history of radio. Colonel Roger Colton ordered that all future American military radios would use frequency modulation. It was a controversial move. FM required more complex circuits, tighter manufacturing tolerances, and wider bandwidth. Many engineers argued it was too complicated for mass wartime production. Colton overruled them. Armstrong, fully committed to the war effort, offered the U.S. government free use of all his FM patents for the duration of the conflict. America entered the war with the most advanced battlefield communications technology on Earth.
Germany made the opposite choice. They stayed with AM. It seemed reasonable. German radios had worked during Blitzkrieg. Poland, France, and the early Soviet campaigns had fallen quickly. Communications had been good enough. But those victories masked a fatal weakness. Germany had never fought an enemy that matched its tactical skill while possessing superior communications. And when that enemy finally arrived, the consequences would be measured not in theory, but in lives, destroyed units, and lost battles. And the radios found in Sicily were only the beginning.
What happened next shocked German commanders across North Africa. The United States didn't just fix its early mistakes. It rebuilt its entire communication system in the middle of a global war. And once those new radios reached the battlefield, the balance of power began to shift faster than anyone in Berlin expected.
By late 1944, the difference was no longer theoretical. It was no longer about specifications, laboratory demonstrations, or captured equipment reports filed somewhere in Berlin. It was visible in the field, measurable in minutes, and counted in casualties. Wherever American and German forces collided, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, one side could think and react faster. And in modern war, speed is dominance. German commanders began to notice a pattern. American units that appeared disorganized would suddenly unleash perfectly timed artillery. Platoons that seemed isolated would coordinate with armor and air support within minutes. Attempts to exploit breakthroughs were met with rapid counterfire. It was as if every American formation possessed a hidden nervous system, transmitting pain and response signals instantly across miles of chaos. That nervous system was radio.
During the Normandy campaign, U.S. rifle companies were saturated with communications equipment. SCR 536 handheld radios connected platoons to company commanders. SCR 300 backpack FM sets linked companies to battalion headquarters. Information flowed vertically and horizontally. A platoon leader pinned down by machine gun fire did not send a runner sprinting across open ground. He raised an antenna and spoke. Seconds later, the message was climbing the chain of command. German platoon leaders often had no such option. Communication depended on runners, field telephones, or prearranged signals. Wires were cut by shellfire. Messengers were killed en route. Orders arrived late or not at all. In fluid combat, delay is defeat. Nowhere was the difference more devastating than in artillery coordination. American forward observers, often barely 21 years old, moved with the infantry carrying FM radios. From hedgerows, church towers, shell craters, or behind advancing tanks, they transmitted precise coordinates back to centralized fire direction centers. These centers calculated firing solutions and massed multiple batteries onto a single target within minutes. A German counterattack forming behind a ridge could be shattered before it fully deployed. A defensive strongpoint could be adjusted onto in real time. Shells walked onto the target as it attempted to relocate. The responsiveness felt supernatural to those on the receiving end. General George Patton famously declared that artillery won battles. What he was describing was not just firepower, it was communication. Without reliable radio, artillery is blind. With it, artillery becomes omnipresent. German soldiers learned to fear the moment an American unit made radio contact, because once that transmission went through, steel would follow. The irony is that Germany possessed brilliant engineers and advanced electronics firms like Telefunken and Siemens. Their equipment was often rugged and well-constructed, but strategic decisions had locked them into amplitude modulation. Industrial constraints limited quartz crystal production. Allied bombing campaigns degraded manufacturing capacity. By the time German engineers attempted to field more advanced portable sets, it was too late. One revealing moment came during Operation Greif in December 1944. SS Commando leader Otto Skorzeny attempted to equip his special unit with captured American vehicles and equipment for deception operations during the Battle of the Bulge. But frontline German soldiers who had used captured American radios were reluctant to give them up. They knew from experience that the American sets worked better. Even in desperation, they preferred enemy technology over their own. That is not propaganda. That is battlefield reality. The German High Command had once laughed at American production claims. They had dismissed the United States as a nation of consumers. Yet by 1944, American factories were producing millions of quartz crystals, tens of thousands of advanced radios, and an ocean of interconnected equipment that functioned as a unified system. Communication was no longer an accessory to combat, it was its foundation. And perhaps the most decisive factor was not the invention itself, but the American ability to learn and adapt. After early failures in North Africa, U.S. forces restructured training, revised communication doctrine, and scaled production rapidly. Mistakes became lessons. Lessons became manufacturing orders. Manufacturing orders became battlefield advantage. Germany, by contrast, had built its early war success on shock and speed. Blitzkrieg relied on coordination, but it had never faced an enemy capable of matching that coordination while exceeding it technologically. When the United States entered the European theater in force, the Wehrmacht encountered an army that could maneuver with comparable skill and communicate with superior clarity. The small olive-drab radio captured in Sicily symbolized that shift. It represented more than miniaturization. It represented industrial culture, scientific risk-taking, and strategic foresight. It represented the decision, made years earlier, to invest in frequency modulation despite skepticism. It represented engineers like Edwin Howard Armstrong, who offered his patents freely for the war effort. It represented immigrants like Henryk Magnuski, channeling personal loss into relentless innovation. Wars are often remembered through images of tanks crossing rivers or aircraft filling the sky. But beneath those dramatic symbols lies infrastructure, supply chains, manufacturing lines, laboratories, technical standards, quiet decisions made long before the first invasion force assembles. Germany underestimated that invisible layer. When German officers in 1943 examined a captured American handheld radio, they saw a clever device. What they did not see was the ecosystem behind it. The factories scaling production at unprecedented speed, the scientific breakthroughs embedded inside its circuits, the doctrine built around instantaneous communication, and the institutional willingness to change course when necessary. By the time the full implications became clear, the imbalance could not be corrected. You cannot redesign your communications architecture in the middle of total war while under constant aerial bombardment and material shortages. You cannot mass-produce millions of precision components overnight when supply routes are severed. In the end, the defeat of Nazi Germany was caused by many factors: strategic overreach, resource constraints, Allied cooperation, overwhelming industrial output. But hidden within those broad forces was something smaller and more precise: the ability of one army to speak clearly in chaos while the others struggled against static. A 5-pound radio, a backpack set running on FM, a decision made in 1938 to embrace complexity over convenience. The German experts who first handled that captured device in Sicily sensed its quality. What they did not fully grasp was that they were holding a glimpse of the future of warfare: networked, responsive, and industrially unstoppable. And by the time that future arrived in full force across Europe, it was already too late to stop it.
History isn't always decided by the loudest explosion or the biggest army. Sometimes it's decided by the clearest signal. If this story changed the way you see World War II, make sure you're subscribed. There are many more hidden forces behind history waiting to be uncovered. I'll see you in the next one.